magnificent speaker with us today, Dr. Bruno Mascitelli. Who is Associate Dean at Swinburne University of Technology, and is also the Director of the Presidency of the European Studies Association of Australia. And he's got a lot of expertise in migration, particularly Italian migration and diaspora, I think. He's going to be speaking today about the upcoming Italian presidency of the Council of the European Union. Remember, at the beginning of today's lectures, we talked about that institution, the Council of the European Union, and how it has a rotating presidency. And that presidency sets some guidelines for what the EU might be doing. So this is what we're going to be hearing today from Bruno. I'm going to set him up. And Bruno, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Is the microphone on?
Yes. The thing is, that should be working.
Thank you, Alfonso, and congratulations on getting together three very different and very sort of central themes for your class. I'm going to be a little bit less normative in terms of rules than the previous presentation, which was very much required. And I'm probably speaking more in a political sense, even though there will be some aspects which I will have to follow. Some of this you probably already had introduced to you in terms of the rotation. It's now coming on to Italy's turn. Greece is currently concluding its 6-month stint, and every country of the European Union will be or is already assigned to a 6-month slot. On the whole, it tends to be a wonderful opportunity for each member state to feel more integrated, carrying on the business of the European Union, sometimes inserting some of its own agenda items, which is where there tends to be a little bit of concern, but giving kind of engagement push by a particular state. Very importantly, 2010 with Lisbon made a number of recommendations, and the European Union, and particularly the Commission, was suggesting and helping the Council come to grips with the fact that the 6-month allotment that there was to each member state really wasn't working very well. And that, of course, brought the permanent representatives, but it did also something to the 6-month presidencies. There was concern that they were up to often grandstanding shenanigans, doing their own personal business or their own national business, and Italy contributed to that as much as any other nation. And so they started to create some kind of binding arrangements of how you would do the 6-month in a much better way. So they introduced this trio arrangement, and that is that it would be an 18-month agenda. 3 nations would participate, each doing 6 months, but that they would work together and not just have a 6-month, race to get something done. But often, by the time you get everything worked out, by the time you wind it down, what have you achieved in the 6 months? And so there was a lot of concern about the fact that the 6-month rotation was not actually working particularly well. So there were these minor changes to the 6-month arrangement. Before I go on to what's happening now, I think it might be handy to look at a little bit of what the previous Italian presidencies have done. We won't go back all the way, and remember this is one of the Rome Treaty arrangements, so going back to 1958. But we'll go back to 1975, where the Italian presidency contributed in part to the issue of the preparation for a European Union parliamentary election, which would take place soon after. And that was a contribution which is to be acknowledged. In 1985, Bettino Craxi, who was then the Prime Minister, made actually quite a number of changes or contributed to pushing the agenda along. There was, of course, the issue of period of Margaret Thatcher, and that is not a particularly wonderful period in terms of the development and agreement in relation to pushing forward a European Union. And so there was a little bit of some shenanigans going on in trying to derail a negative intervention by Thatcher, and that actually worked. As I said, often the European Union presidency of 6 months allows a nation to do a little bit of leadership engagement, and Italy has always been very keen on carrying that out. And in fact, that year, Vicino Craxi was involved in probably the first incident where Italy acted in an independent fashion, and that was the standoff with the US in that period, Ronald Reagan, when the Achille Lauro had been, what's the word? Yeah, the hijackers, that's right. And the US literally demanded the extradition of the person, physically intervened, and the Italian government told the US government to back off. And there was a confrontation at the military airport of Rome, where a small group of American troops and Italian troops looked at each other in the eye. Very strange, but that's politics. And of course, it's not that surprising. If we get to 1990, the Prime Ministership of Andreotti, we have the Europe of 12 by that time, and an initial approval of the document on political union, which is now starting to change the terminology and even the way in which the European community started to see itself, and moving away from the concept or the term community to a union. These are very important, and we shouldn't forget the fact that in that period the Berlin Wall had just come down in November 1989. The Italian presidency is there on the 1st of January, so you are in the heart of the massive changes that are happening in Eastern Europe, and of course the reunification of Germany. By the way, we now know that Margaret Thatcher was opposed to the reunification of Germany, and so was Andreotti, and he made that beautiful statement that is, "I love Germany so much that I prefer to have two of them," meaning he was opposed to the unification. It's a funny way to put it, but it's beautiful. And there was that distrust by many of the member states that a powerful, new, reunified Germany was not in the interests of the world, of Europe, and that we still haven't got over the lessons of the Second World War. Well, they didn't win, and life would go in a very different direction, and Germany was unified. However, you would be surprised by the fact that there was not a unanimous view of a reunified Germany. If we move further on to the next presidency in 1996, we are in the period of the mad cow disease with the UK, and very serious stuff. And Britain was in great difficulty. And so there had to be a debate, discussion on how to deal with that. But we all are also starting to touch on very important developments in the European Union related to Euro readiness and Maastricht discussion, the criteria, and then later on the Amsterdam Treaty, which has its own important modifications. The presidency that everyone remembers, however, is Silvio Berlusconi in 2003. And I still remember it now, in the sense that it's not, for me, it's not quite history, it's still current politics. And of course, he's remembered for a number of things relating to his engagement with the European Union. And one of the first events that occurred, of course, was the Prime Minister of the country that is the President of the European Union for that period, of course, has to address the Parliament. And in the address to the Parliament, we get that very famous incident, which you can still find on YouTube, and that is Martin Schulz, who, by the way, is the President of the Parliament today, and is putting his hand up to be the new Commission President. Put his hand up. He was the leader of the Social Democratic Party bloc. Just put his hand up, normal thing. After Berlusconi had finished his presentation, and he just asked a very simple question, which Berlusconi gets asked probably every day in the Italian Parliament, and that is, you know, don't you feel you've got a conflict of interest, you know, you've been charged with this. And remember, the European Union was not very happy about having a president of the Union who was being investigated for fraud, corruption, and every other possible criminal charge you can imagine. It was not a good feeling. It did not give that kind of legitimacy and sense of, you know, authority to the European Union. We've got the President of the European Union, the Italian Prime Minister, is up on charges of corruption. Not a good look. And by the way, I should also add that his number two, and again, you'll see it in the YouTube if you take the trouble to see it, the number two was the former leader of the Italian fascists. So there was also another big debate about what do you do with the Italians who have got Berlusconi and a former fascist. In fact, there were boycotts by a number of European Union leaders at the time, feeling very uncomfortable. They got over it over time, and we see this progression of the European Union in accepting and understanding that there will be far-right representatives in the European Parliament and elsewhere, and that sometimes there will be leaders of member states who are anti-Semite or whatever else they happen to have in their program. And by the way, this came up with the Austrian Prime Minister, what's his name? Haider, when there were all these boycotts. I remember the Italian Prime Minister at the time said, I'm not meeting him when he's coming to Italy. So, you know, it's quite vibrant out there. And a lot of these debates and discussions are very much on the agenda for discussion. Now, Italy didn't achieve very much in the Berlusconi, and that little exchange that he had with Schulz, you know, is something that kind of just continued for years. And the Berlusconi is a larger-than-life personality. One of his recommendations off the cuff, and that's the way he worked, he never noticed anything there. He said, you know what, it's not a bad idea. Let's invite Israel to be part of the European Union. Because, you know, why not? They're good friends of ours. They're over there in the world. Well, you know, come on. And that raises a good point. What is the European Union? I mean, is it a collection of European states, or is it a fan club? Or is it just a group of good friends? And while that's a bizarre example, it's actually put on the table something interesting for discussion, and that is, where does it start, where does it finish? Is the European Union a rival to the United Nations, i.e. does it simply keep growing? And what's its jurisdiction? So, on the whole, you could probably say that the Italian presidency was eventful, probably did produce tremendous outcomes, but then none of them do it in any kind of strict way. And they are carrying forward an agenda, and in many respects the Italians did so sometimes better, sometimes not. We currently have the Greek presidency, and again that raised great controversy when there was the lead up to the Greek presidency. Why? Because Greece was at that time even being discussed as to whether it could survive the European Union. Is it going to exit the euro? Do you remember this discussion not so long ago? Can they exist? Can they continue? Should they get out? And here they are about to assume the presidency of the European Union. Again, another problem that do you follow these waves of controversy? Do you stick to your guns? So what did the Greeks do? They went in with a very modest agenda for a range of reasons. The message had to be very clear that there's no way that they could have an extravagant presidency. They couldn't keep up with, certainly with some of the other member states that had just recently undertaken their presidency, and the message to the Greek population would have been a disaster had they even tried to do that. So if you look at, and if you were to measure on the basis of the number of meetings, the kind of meetings, the receptions, the hospitality, it's probably down to 10% of the French level, which was one of the highest. So we even measure these things in terms of expenditure and extravagance, and definitely Greece, it had to take a bit of a back seat, and I don't think that that's a surprise. And of course, we're still in the middle of the global financial crisis, or more precisely, the European sovereign debt crisis, of which the southern flank, very badly termed by the economists as the PIGS countries, but the southern flank of the European Union is still engulfed in that, and while Ireland is now starting to emerge, having repaid all of its debts to the IMF and released from many of the commitments, life's not going particularly well in those nations. So while they may not be burdened by tremendous bomb attacks by the market, they are certainly not out of difficulty. Okay, one of the things that I was curious, I thought the Italians would have already had a logo, and a clearer statement of intent would have been out there in terms of what they wanted to achieve and interpret it in their own way. And in actual fact, it's not ready yet. So there's no logo, and they're still using pretty much a up-to-date version that Enrico Letta produced about a bit less than a year ago when they were preparing for the Italian presidency. So not a great deal has been worked out, and I think it's probably going to come out in the next month or two, maximum two. But what do we have? In Italy, besides the Italian legal situation, which I'll get into in a moment, they know that they're facing a very delicate moment in European Union events. We have, in the next 6 months, key moments where the European Union will be measured and probably ways that will be defining. And they include the new elections to the Parliament. And that's always a scary indicator, because it tells you where the legitimacy of the population, whether it's supporting, whether it's participating, whether it even bothers to go and vote. And remember, in the last elections, I think it was the last one, maybe the one before, Poland had just joined and not even 10% of the population bothered to vote. And that sent a pretty bad message. There's no engagement, no understanding. And the European Union is seen like some kind of bank, helps everybody out to some extent that's not even excluded from the Ukraine scenario today. So, somehow it's the silver bullet. And yet that's not what particularly the traditional 15 member states of the European Union wanted it to appear or to be. And that is a sense of greater engagement. This is for everybody, not just some kind of helping aid agency. So we've got the Parliament, we've also got the European Commission that's got to come up for renomination. There's a lot of shenanigans that go on with the new Commission. The leaders of the ones who are proposing themselves will try and seek out, first of all, party nomination, and that seems to be clear now. So the centre-right now appear to have a candidate, and that's Juncker, and the centre-left appear to have a candidate, and that is Martin Schulz. But then they have to get the support of all the member states. And there's a lot of lobbying that goes on in the background in order to have that preferred person that can be the best nomination. And on top of that, they have to also re-propose or propose the new list of the commissioners. In addition, the re-election or the election of a new president, either replacing or the renomination of Van Rompuy, and of course the foreign affairs and security policy currently Catherine Ashton. So it's a very difficult moment. The first sitting of the Parliament will enact, in fact, I think it will be the 1st of July, and it will be the first day of the Italian presidency, of which there's going to have to be some kind of accountability. So it's there's a great deal up there in terms of events happening. What have we got at the national level? Well, it's not particularly great. You have the 63rd government of Italy. You have a current government in Italy that is trying to work a European agenda. It's not too different from the previous Enrico Letta. It's quite confusing to many, both in Europe but also in Italy, in terms of what is this government? Will it last? Are we going to see another replacement? And by the way, the European Union presidency is quite packed with, if you look at the country, and on many occasions you'll see two names. And that often means that there were two governments in the life of that presidency of 6 months. And Italy is one of the culprits there by a mile. So there's not a great sense of security, of kind of authority. And while this Matteo Renzi is young and dynamic and the youngest Prime Minister at 39 years old, you know, everyone feels there's a lot of fluff out there, you know, just repeating the same things. What does it really mean? And can Italy also not set a bad example in trying to use the presidency for its own economic benefit and maybe renegotiating some of the terms in relation to financial and fiscal austerity? Okay, the official things that have been presented by the Foreign Affairs include the three large areas referred to as the Europe of growth, the citizens' Europe, and Europe in the world. And it's managed to put those three things in such a way that it kind of encompasses almost all the points that are required. And as you can see, it is being presented in a trio arrangement where Italy is the first of the trio. So that following Italy will be Latvia in January 2015, followed by Luxembourg in July of 2015. And in theory, they're meant to, all three of them, be working on those themes in as concrete way as possible. Where there's been some peculiarity, where Italy has tried to push its own agenda and give something of an impulse and something innovative, it's the kind of meeting of paths of the fact that in 2015, Italy will be doing the World Expo. Now, I'm not sure if you can remember, but in 2010, Shanghai was the location of the World Expo, very successful. Did anyone go to the Shanghai Expo in 2010? No? Wonderful. And that's where you see all the nation sort of buildings, and some of the most beautiful buildings. The Italian one was actually very good. Saudi Arabia, UK was actually surprisingly good. The American one was a dud. And in fact, it was such a dud, they actually refused to be part of it. And I think it was still Clinton, as in Hillary, who was embarrassed when the Chinese tried to put pressure on the Americans to be part of and have a building. The Chinese said, listen, if you're going to make a big song and dance about paying the money, we'll pay it for you. I.e., China was prepared to pay for the US's stand. Well, in the end, the Americans knew that this was a little embarrassing, and I think Clinton said, look, we better do something. And by the way, what they did was not particularly nice. It was very cheap and all the rest of it. However, is it important? Well, the Italians think it is, and it's built around the Milan former industrial centre. They're going to use, they've built, you know, mega buildings as a economic relaunching of the economy. And I think they've got all of their money on a very small little thing. As much as Milan is quite central to the Italian economy, it's probably got greater expectations than I think that they can meet. However, they're using that as a platform to introduce a number of very important issues, one of which is, of course, how do we grow the economy? And remember, this is the thing that Italy and Greece really want to push in the European Union against the Germans, and that is it needs to be a Europe of growth, not a Europe of austerity. We've had enough of that. We've had a lot of negative consequences as a result of the austerity. We've got massive unemployment. If we do not have a growth perspective, we are ruined, finished. So that's what the Italians are trying to do on the back of what the Greeks are doing, but because of their limitations in terms of abilities to make that point, it's been kind of a little lost. But I suspect that Italy will make a bit of a noise about it, and that's what Renzi is going around saying to the European leaders, that, you know, we really have to, you know, stop with this austerity. And by the way, the Italians have got the experience. Mario Monti was the Prime Minister for a couple of years, maybe not even that long. And what he did was he loyally did exactly that, carry out austerity. When the elections came on, pom, gone. So politicians have that issue, is that they know how to win elections, or they know what the economy needs, but they don't know how to win the elections after they've done what they had to do. So they want to stay in power, and they cannot continue the perpetual line of cuts and more cuts. And now the levels of unemployment in some countries are starting to get quite serious and costly out of control. When Renzi made his first statements, of course they were done for the media, and they were a bit rhetorical and probably not giving a great deal that was new. But there was something in the statements that I thought was quite interesting, and that is that, and it reflects Italy's role in the European Union. We're kind of tired of taking orders. Listen to that. That's a nice statement. We're tired of taking orders from the European Union. Now, it wasn't meant to be in that hostile way of, we're going to jump ship, but, we are part of the European Union. We are also part of its solution. So we're not going to just go to meetings and, yes, sort of salute and we'll do what you say. And so it's kind of a little bit standing up, particularly to Merkel and to some of the others, and it fits in line with the new perspective of no longer austerity, but we need to find something positive. Italy's also made statements related to the fact that, from an institutional standpoint, there's no other institution insofar as it's concerned. There is no option of leaving Europe. That's not an option. There's no option of taking steps back. And there is no options of reducing commitment to Europe. In fact, one of the platforms that Italy presented, which maybe not on this slide, on another, was that there needs to be greater commitment to the unification or the unity of the European Union. And what that statement was about how much money each member state is contributing to European Union functions. Right now it's sitting around about the 1.4% of GDP, and the last time there was a request by Barroso, the Germans immediately said, no way. Italy wants to push that along. Now I don't know how they can afford it, but quite clearly if you don't have more commitment, then talking about greater unity and greater integration is all pie in the sky. So there may be more debate about having greater levels of financial commitment to the European Union and to the functions, including things such as supporting particular programs. The Italian economic scenario I don't need to spend too much time on. It's pretty miserable, despite the fact that the economy is not now in recession. It has been in recession for quite a while, so the growth is pretty minuscule. And government and public debt, in actual fact, has increased so that it's around the 130 mark, and that's even higher than when the alarm bells were ringing a year or two ago. So the situation is not particularly great. The Italian economy, which is different from the Greek, the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the Irish, is that it's actually it's the big one, it's the smallest of the big ones. And therefore, this too big to fail business is actually pretty serious, because it's one thing for a Portuguese or an Irish, but if the Italian economy were to go down, France and Germany are certainly not immune. And therefore, there's a lot of attention to making sure that things don't get out of control, but at the same time, you cannot push the economy to the hilt and face the levels of unemployment that in Italy are danger. Let me just warn you that Italian fascism in the 1920s had very similar circumstances, social circumstances, for it to occur. What is missing today, which is different from them, is that there is no mass fascist party at the moment, as opposed to what there is in Greece. And that can be a matter of time. So you don't want to be complacent in some of these issues. And one of the things that, of course, is whipping up quite a great deal is, of course, the migration question. Now, I'm not going to go into any of the normative issues related to migration, but only that, particularly Italy and Greece, have been, because of their soft borders, have been the ones that have borne the brunt of the movement of people, desperate people from numerous locations, particularly Africa, but also Eastern Europe, where illegal, so-called illegal, I put that in quotes because illegal really just means without papers or without documentation, and their quest to get some kind of sort of to survive. What has come with that has been massive tragedy, and you know, we're talking in the thousands now of people who just simply disappear. Most of the cases of the drownings are reported, but not all of them, and there are many cases where you just don't know. Now, this is an issue that both Greece and Italy have tried to put into a legal or a European Union framework for resolution. And I remember even someone like Berlusconi, at a certain point when there was a major tragedy, this was back in 2011, just yelled and appealed to the European Union, we can't deal with this on our own. And I thought for the first time this guy says something intelligent, and it really made an impact. And that's where there will probably be some coordinated approach towards dealing with the enormous difficulty that brings, some of which is experienced by some of the Sicilian and the other Italian islands, which are in the south of the country. Insofar as there's been any framework in trying to deal with this, these are some of the so-called recommendations, and one of the common organisations or agreements is the Frontex, which of course deals with external frontiers, and there are numerous platitudes about how this is all going to be tied up. We'll see. But certainly it is a very serious matter. I probably won't spend too much time on some of the more ambitious things. You'll see the light federalism there, a matter raised by the Italian government, and that is up to 5% of GDP to, well, I can't see it. I mean, here I am saying 1.4 and I want to jump to 5. Very unlikely. And more than likely, it probably won't even increase. And the argument that Merkel will have is, how come we right now? You know, just leave it for some other time. Quite clearly, the crisis, the economic crisis across the board has been very devastating to all of the European Union nations. Of course, some are travelling a little bit better, but I wouldn't jump up and down that Germany's got a growth rate of 1.5. Well, so what? It's 1.5. You know, it's just barely just off the ground. So we're really still to see an advance in economic growth when the majority of the European member states are travelling pretty poorly and very close to the zero mark. Turkey and the Balkans, Turkey in particular, hey, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. There's been, again, a warning to Turkey, especially over the incidents I think it's last year now, over the protest demonstrations that took place over a very petty little issue. And the Turkish police just went, you know, obviously they were given orders, but they just went so overboard. I mean, these were not even left-wing protesters. They were kind of, you know, greenies who really just wanted some space in the centre of Istanbul. And you know, the Turkish police aren't going to be told what to do. And but I think we're starting to see the cracks in the Turkish government, whether it's through alleged corruption or other. But certainly, Turkey, if anything, has gone backwards in the last 12 months vis-a-vis its relationship with the rest of the European Union. How long this scenario can last, I think Turkey is sick and tired of it. The only issue is, I don't think Turkey can keep up its 7% economic growth, which is one of the bargaining chips that it had in terms of why you should be talking to us seriously. So on both counts, it's going to be wait and see. The rest of the Balkans, Serbia starting discussions, and some other developments in more minor areas, but I think there's no rush to push any agenda quicker than what's been already allocated. I might just move on to close this, maybe go straight to the conclusion. To some extent, and this is what the European Union fears, is that national agendas kind of get in the way of European Union development of issues. And I'm afraid to say that the Italian scenario is only just above that, in the sense that it is still very much wrapped by its own problems, and some of the agenda items are framed in such a way that Italy will be trying to get some national concessions that may not necessarily be applicable elsewhere. Can the government survive to the end of the year? According to Berlusconi, he's happy for the Renzi government to remain there. The problem is that Berlusconi, when he wakes up every day, there might be a change of mind. And in actual fact, it will be decided pretty much by the Berlusconi opposition. By the way, I should remind you, Berlusconi does not sit in Parliament, and this raises another interesting thing. Berlusconi wants to candidate himself in the European elections. So what's the legal consideration here? Can he? He's been banned from the Italian Parliament, so can he stand for the European election? I don't think there's a rule in the European election which would stop him. Is that correct? So I think, here we are. We're up to life number 8.
Rules for the European elections are set by national bodies. So the Italian Electoral Commission, or whatever it is, should decide.
Well, we'll see. They may well say he was banned from being senator, but so there you are. Here we are, thought that he was gone, and we only know. But I have a feeling that the Renzi government might survive to the end of the year, and therefore there should be a relatively smooth Italian presidency that Luis Carrier kicks along the agenda items. What clearly is happening, and is happening in Italy as it is in many other countries, and we heard it before, Samantha. Yeah, we heard it before, and that is this Euro-skepticism that's occurring across the board. In some countries, unheard of until recently. Italy would have been in that category. Until Berlusconi arrived, Italy was a flag waver for the European Union, whether it understood, agreed, but it never attacked and never undermined. But of course, the Euro and the Eurozone issues have played a role in undermining some of that, and that is that when it gets down to tin tax, it's also a question of the ability for individual citizens to feel that they're better off. And a lot of people are questioning that in relation to the euro and to the respective economy. Sometimes I think that blaming everything on the euro is a little bit of a problem. It's a bit like blaming the postman for bad mail. But that's the perception, and we haven't quite got out of that. The European parliamentary elections, I think, will tell us quite a lot, because the Eurosceptics, at this point, if I'm not mistaken, already occupy 25% of the seats. They're projected.
Now it's 12%.
12%.
I just looked it up.
Okay, good. And that's a bizarre scenario when you think that they're in there to destroy it. So watch this space. The Euroscepticism is very strong, and while the Italian presidency will be fighting against it, even within Italy, it's not necessarily guaranteed, given the very difficult economic state that there is in Italy and also in many other European Union states. I'll finish there, but happy to discuss.